Hey, DeRacers. So today we wanted to go over a enormous project that we've been chipping away at, which is studying the effects of wearables. And we've done thousands of races with and without. We have some early findings, but we also will show you where we got stuck. It's mostly due to race registration challenges, but we'll go over all of that.
Yeah, I don't know, between the two of us, we did half a dozen different horses, probably 500 to 1,000 races plus on every single one of them. So we spent a lot of Dirk in the month of January trying to get to know essentially what wearables does to your horse. And we're hoping to be able to bring those findings to you in a multi-part series.
Yep. Now, a couple things that we know, or we now absolutely know. You may have noticed from us talking about this previously, where there's mostly three phases of a race. Every single furlong has 10 individual rolls, and that's really important as we talk about this today. And so we call them rolls because, like the way they describe it in the white paper, it's like a gigantic dice. So the question is like when you roll those dice, there's the first 15 rolls is definitely a phase. And then the final 30% of a race is what we would call the final 30. So first 15 rolls, final 30% of rolls, and then everything else falls in the middle. Now, to prove this, what we did is we went back and we took Skondert. Skondert has ran over 900 races unequipped on turf 8s. So there are 80 rolls. And I'm going to play you a little video right here. And what you're going to notice, it's only a 20-second video. So the first second and a half of those first 15, and you'll see him lunge in, and you're going to see it sit in the middle, and then you're going to see it accelerate in that last 30.
Mm-hmm.
So right away, you see it jump out of the 15, and now it's going to hit this middle pack. And you'll notice the dice rolls, what you're seeing here is at the bottom, it's how fast your horse can roll on the throw. And then the bell curve that you're seeing is the distribution of where it's hitting. Now, as we're approaching the final 30%, you'll see it's starting to move to the left and it gets taller. So you're having very different changes. That dice, the numbers on that dice evolve without a doubt throughout the entirety of that race.
Yeah, now, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and play that one more time. And I want to point out the fact that on the bottom here, you're seeing essentially a range of 1,000 to roughly 1,500. And that's not the exact numbers. We know they go a little bit lower and a little bit higher, but we wanted to be able to show the range. And that is essentially the milliseconds that your individual roll has. So as that horse rolls a 1,200, right, it has to roll 10 of those to go one full furlong. So if you ran 1,200 times 10, that would be a 12-second average furlong. So when you're looking at that, what essentially it is as it's shifting, right? As we're going from this side to this side, we're able to see that it is speeding up over time. And that is seen as you move through the phases. The other thing that you saw in that video is that the standard deviation, if it's shrinking, so if you're getting a smaller range of rolls that you get in a period of time, it will actually drive the spike up. And that means that you are tightening the space that horse can roll in. So it might, at the end of that race, as we saw it increase, it might be sitting between a 1050 and an 1150 over and over and over and over and over. And that just means that you're more consistently hitting in a tighter space with those rolls.
Excellent. Now, we took our horses that we were going to run as a test, seen Skondert, a veteran that has run thousands of races. That gave us just strong confidence that this is something that we should see. So then what we did is we took our 6 horses, we ran them unequipped, and we targeted a tremendous amount of data sets for each of them. And we found that they all followed the same pattern. So then once we had a similar pattern, this is where it got extremely expensive, is we put on very specific gear. So for a new start, I believe I had approximately 310 speed, 0 stamina, and like 10 reaction. So it was almost exclusively a speed focus, 0 impact on stamina. And then when we were racing the equipment, she was unfortunately going up against all the level 80s with really good gear. So I literally was just handing Dirk over, and I would not podium ever. But it gave us good data.
Yeah, it's important to remind people that we did this when there were no brackets, right? You were going up against everything from a level 1 to an 80, whoever was wearing equipment. Now, those in the month of January, you already had horses that were level 80. and a lot of them that are level 60 plus. So when we were doing our equipment races, these horses that we were running were a level 30, 35, something like that. And we were only able to do a certain amount of wearables due to what was available to them at that level. And yeah, we lost a lot of dirt doing it, but it was really important for us to create a baseline, and that's going to be present and really important when you see what we do in the coming parts of this series too, and even later in this particular video. It was important that we established a baseline for speed that was never altered. We could not change that equipment. We had to keep it exactly the same, and the reason why that's important is that we were going to come back and revisit what happens when you tweak only the stamina of that equipment set. So yeah, I had 2-3 horses that were running like 220, 250 speed boost going up against these horses that had 1,000 speed boost. Yep. And so I was getting absolutely annihilated. In fact, at one point I saw that I had no podiums in 75 plus races. That was the most that I had seen, but every once in a while you'd pull out a third place here and there.
Yep.
But for the most part, you were absolutely getting destroyed. But out of that, we are able to overlay what that same exact set of dice rolls will look like if you have equipment on. And that's what we're going to start to talk about next.
Yep. Now, we can only give you some early hypotheses. We are definitely not done with this study, but we just wanted to share with you, and then also to just say you're welcome to all of those level 80 champion horses that were like, dude, I was making so much money. And now the reason why you're not making as much money is because we can't do that test at the moment. But let's start with this one. So as we pointed out, the first 15 rolls, you'll notice here, the blue is the unequipped, and then the red overlay on top of it is the equipped version of it. Now, there is more unequipped data than we were able to get fully. So like, again, once we can get these tests underway, it might level out a little bit more. But what's interesting about this is that the shapes between the blue and the red remain quite constant. If we were bouncing around from different horses, every horse seems to have its own unique shape. So when you see the shape is just shifting laterally, this starts to give us the thought that speed only impacts or might only impact a lateral movement. Mm-hmm. As I switch to the middle of the race, you'll notice that this graphic looks even more similar. And the reason that I believe that the middle looks the most similar is because the middle is the largest data set of all of the rolls. So that means that what we're assessing here in the middle, we're having more data than we do in the first 15 or the last 30%, because the middle is the bulk of the race. So to see the shape is almost identical, but just a lateral movement makes me believe yet again that speed is the lateral movement. And when I move to that final 30, you'll notice that the shape again is quite similar. The standard deviation does get tighter, which means that the red is getting a hair taller. We do not know if this is because data set just needs a little bit more, or if maybe speed is burning off some of the stamina, and maybe that's the impact here. But it's difficult to fully assess. But these are some of the early patterns that we are starting to see.
It's also important to understand that when you're seeing those snippets, that is a particular surface and distance, right? We have a track and distance singularity. We're looking at all of the rolls in the first 15, the mid, and the final 30. And for each of your track and distance combos, you're going to see a slightly different chart. It basically follows the same pattern, but more importantly, what is fascinating to us is that for the most part, when you put equipment on, those stay the same. And that's key whenever you're testing a hypothesis in any scientific research. We need to be able to prove that it stays constant as you move from one type to another and only change that one variable. So we changed that one variable of speed and saw lateral movement. Now, something that's really important to point out, and I love this particular graphic. This is two different versions of looking at that same set of data. The one on the left, where we're looking at the middle portion of the race, it's difficult to see, but the light blue is that original unequipped times, those rolls that we just saw in the previous graphic. And that previous graphic looked like this. So this blue that you see is actually what we see in this one as light blue. The spikes that you see are the individual rolls themselves, and you may actually have some that are higher or lower, but then it is distributed using normal distribution on the left-hand side. The ones in red are a normal distribution of those same individual rolls, but for equipment. But what we want to be able to point out, and what I'm super excited about, is the one on the right. You can actually see that the data is not distributed normally. And this is going to open up part 2, part 3, part 4, however many parts we can do of this series to talk about the skewing of your data as you have variables that change, right? Every single horse has unique speed variables, stamina variables, and even when it comes to reaction or focus, what they're going to do to your individual rolls. And the one on the right, you can see has a tail off to the right. That means that it can hit those higher numbers still, but just with less frequency, right? It's being flattened, essentially deflated. So one way you can think of this is we are padding and stuffing the left-hand side of this distribution curve and being able to see more of them occur between, say, 1076 and maybe 1224 or 1225 or so is the midpoint on here. So having them occur more often to the left means that this horse in the middle of the race was able to run more often faster than slower if you just think about distribution.
Now, I want to add to this because you use the word normal distribution. And for people that are not major stats nerds, what normal distribution means is that if you have a bell curve, which is that mostly if that shape on the left-hand side, that red, where if you draw a line down the dead center of the peak, it would have a mirrored effect. On the left and the right, they would look identical. That is what you'd call normal distribution. But what we're realizing is that it is a beta distribution, which means that it is being modified. And then in that top left corner, this is just an auto-generated function that is based off of the data that is seen. This is not reverse engineering. This is not saying exactly what the scores are or how to assess the horses or anything. It is just showing that there is a complex function that's being used. So most likely, the system is using a fair RNG model, which is taking a total randomization of a range, and then it applies it to a function. And that function most likely are the elements of your natural speed, stamina, reaction, wearable effects. And then that function gets modified based off of where it is in the existence of the race. That would be that X value. So X rolls, as you move deeper and deeper and deeper into it, the things would start to adjust. So it's a really complex calculus equation, but that would lead to this beta distribution model that you're seeing on the right.
And what we were able to determine, and we almost kind of stumbled on this accidentally. If you look at the graphic on the left, the portion that falls underneath the red curve, that's a polynomial curve there with multiple points. The left-hand side between, what is that, roughly 1028 and about 1108, you'll see that there's not a lot of bars there. We just don't have columns. And the reason why that's happening is because the closer you get to that left-hand side of what would be a normal distribution, they just aren't happening. And that's what made us realize that there must be skewing. And so the graphic on the right shows you that, yep, you're packing them all into the left-hand side. So a normal distribution looks like it should run with a midpoint around whatever that is, 1220 to 1230. But actually, if you look on the right-hand side, it's closer to a midpoint at between 1216 and 1224. So it's actually shifted by about 8 milliseconds. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot. But when you stop and think about how often you have a roll in these races, every 10th of a furlong, if you've got 8 milliseconds difference, that adds up, especially when you got a 15 furlong race with 150 rolls.
Yep.
That 8 milliseconds is huge. So I think that sets us up, hopefully, to be able to talk about a lot of the findings in our next part of the series. But why don't you tell people where we got stuck and why that's going to be so key and why we don't have part 2 coming out next week?
Yeah, so this is all with just speed boost. So we were feeling really good that we were starting to see a pattern. It was repeatable amongst all of our horses. Next thing that we wanted to do was to equip it with the same amount of speed, but just figure out how to add some degree of stamina. And then what we were going to do is go back to giving all of our money away and to see how much losing data we can get, so we could have something to compare. Because if we have a hypothesis of how we measure speed, once we have stamina added, we'd be able to isolate out the results to know this is what stamina did to the equation. But the problem was, as soon as brackets were introduced, these horses couldn't go into races that are equipped anymore. They weren't filling. So we've literally been stopped. We can't race. We want to race these horses. We want to put them in there. But if people aren't running with equipment races, we can't run any data. And what sucks about this is that we also have a theory that the moment we could start to assess the true benefits of stamina, speed, and reaction, one, we want to know that quickly before we get jockeys, because that's going to be another thing to study. But the next one, going back to this screenshot real quick, if we were able to take a random horse and we look at that image on the right-hand side and we know what speed and stamina do, it might give us the ability to create tools where we could start to assess what is your horse's baseline speed, stamina. We pretty much know what reaction is. But if we were able to tell you, this is what we think your speed is, this is what we think your stamina is, this would better give you the ability to know, oh, on this type of track, I need to make sure that I'm putting stamina-based things because I need to have maybe a wider standard deviation. That's going to be beneficial to me. So we're stuck, but we really want to keep doing this. So register your horses.
we need thousands, honestly, probably at least across all the horses, but hundreds of races with these new combinations of speed and stamina equipment. And being able to do that is going to require that we have lots of races filling. Along with that, I want to just leave one teaser. You see what speed does. And we've done some internal testing, but it's not a part of this video yet, to see what stamina has done to some of the top horses out there. And it is really, really fascinating. And so for those of you out there that think maybe stamina doesn't do very much, maybe it doesn't, not a whole lot, but it does just enough to entirely change the shape of those bell curves. And that's going to be what we're going to be trying to dig into next.
Yep, especially when we start packing races with more horses and not just the same 10, 12 horses that are racing again and again and again and again, I think you're going to really start to see that you can dial in your horse, and we're going to see a lot more interesting bunching. But it's going to be good. But people, help us help you. Get out there, register, because if jockeys come soon and we don't have the ability to do this, we're going to have some gaps in our research, which would suck. And we have just burned thousands of dirt for no reason.
Yep. Let us burn the dirt.